registers, you get a letter from the registrar. Who knows whether it goes into file 13 or not. 2 years ago, we had a drive in Montgomery, Alabama, where 4,000 Negroes applied. And when the registration books were closed, they announced that 210-odd people had passed the test. Well, this is all in the hands of white registrars and white racists. The Negro just cannot get a fair shake at the voting booth, and this is another one of our primary concerns.
In a moment, we'll come back, and at that point, Mr. Farmer, I'd like to ask you, actually, whether, by definition, in terms of what you say the criteria must be to avoid such a march, there isn't going to have to be one, but let's talk about that in just a moment. Mr. Farmer, a moment or so ago, you were talking about the conditions which would have to exist if there were to be this march on Washington, if there were to be the kind of action that you gentlemen have talked about for the summer of this year. It seemed to me, as you described what it is you feel must be accomplished to avoid that we're not going to avoid that. You seem to be asking for things that were quite legitimate. Everyone at this table and many, many, many other people, but it didn't seem to me that it was too likely that you were going to achieve what it is you want to achieve. Does this mean that this summer we'll see the kind of march on Washington, we'll see the kind of action that you're talking about?
There will be a march on Washington early in the fall, unless these demands are met, and I think that they are legitimate demands. What the federal government has to do, or needs to do, in order to prevent such a march, is first of all to pass strong civil rights legislation with teeth in it. Second, to see that all places that serve the public are completely desegregated. And third, stop using federal funds to subsidize segregation. In the Area Redevelopment Administration, where funds are loaned to businesses that want to build units in the South, factories or what have you. Many of these businesses that go south then employ only white persons. I saw a sign on a highway in South Carolina just a month ago stating that such and such a firm will build a factory here on this site. 500 white women will be hired. Now, this was to be with money loaned by the federal government to the concern. Well, that has to stop. We have to put an end to discrimination in employment. I think it can be done. I think it must be done.
Do you assume that enough will be done by the fall of the year to avoid the kind of march you've talked about?
Well, I'm not assuming anything. These are our demands. And if they are met, we'll be delighted, because I don't want to march. I have bad feet. I don't like marching. But if I have to march, I will march, because there is something that is more important than my feet.
In the criteria you establish, I wonder about the question of federal aid to education and the importance in your mind of preventing such aid from going to southern states or other states that officially practice discrimination.
Yes, as long as those states practice segregation or discrimination officially, then federal funds should not be used there.
Or unofficially.
Unofficially, yes. This was a recommendation of the Civil Rights Commission that all federal funds be withdrawn from Mississippi. I go along with that. I believe in it. Now, CORE is waging a campaign now against school bonds that are issued by school districts, cities, and states in the Deep South where the schools are completely segregated. These bonds are marketed in 7 northern states, including New York State. Hundreds of millions of dollars are involved. The people who put their money into those school bonds from segregated areas are thereby subsidizing segregation. Now, they may be good people in the sense that they don't beat their wives, they don't push ladies down subway steps. They don't realize that the money that they are pouring into those bonds, that they're investing into those bonds, are being used to build and maintain segregated facilities. Well, that should stop.
Logically, of course, I have to go on and then ask the question about your concern for segregation in northern schools. And logically thereafter, I suppose I must ask about your attitude toward the bond issues floated in northern communities to support schools in which you do not feel there has been sufficient effort toward integration.
Well, let me say that I think segregated schools are bad and a violation of the Supreme Court ruling, whether they are by law segregated or de facto segregated. By law in the South and de facto in the North. There's just as much school segregation in the North as there is in the South. So this will be the next step. Our first step in this campaign is to stop the errant segregation that exists by law in the South, then we will turn this campaign into northern cities. We are presently, as you know, engaged in drives in city after city in the North to eliminate de facto segregation. There have been boycotts, student boycotts, in which we've been involved. And in Inglewood, where the local core chapter is involved, there has been for a long time now a study inn. This is a new kind of inn where the kids, the children who were boycotting the school, decided that they would attend the other school where they wanted to go and would receive a better education. They are sitting in those classes and studying, and I'm told that they're actually being called on now. But still, they presumably will not receive any credit for the courses which they take there. Well, this sort of technique will be used more widely. Following that, the economic approach.
Well, I was just going to ask you about that. You said this technique will be used more widely.
Yes.
Specifically, what do you refer to?
Specifically, I'm referring to study ends, boycotts and study ends in northern schools which are de facto segregated.
Are these planned as of now for the fall?
These are being planned as of now for the fall.
In particular localities?
In various cities. I cannot specify the cities at the present time.
All right, I cut off Mr. Morrison before. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say that the proposal to withdraw federal financial aid and subsidies from those southern states which practice segregation officially, and as Reverend Walker pointed out, unofficially, is a good, sound one. It has been advocated before. It is not really new. But what I think was most significant historically about the last demand was that it came from an official agency of the United States government, the United States Civil Rights Commission, which significantly is predominantly white. And it shows, I think, Minister Malcom X, that there are many white people who favor drastic action against the segregationists of the South and are seeking conscientiously to end segregation and to create equality between Negroes and whites in America. But I would...
If there are many whites who are trying to do this, why isn't more being done about it?
Well,
because what you're saying in essence is that the government is responsible for segregation, that the government is subsidizing segregation, that the government is the one that's actually instigating and carrying out this segregation that the politicians profess to be against.
Well,